I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. If you've got an article or a piece of movie news or a topic or a question that you want me to explore on The Daily Question, then please send me an email or tweet it at me. All of the details are in the video description below. Right, without any further ado, let's get into today's question of the day. Should you ask your children for consent before you change their nappies? The reason I'm asking that question is because probably by now a lot of you have seen this piece of video footage that's doing the rounds of an Australian sexuality expert who appeared in the Australian media last week and suggested that a good way to begin to teach your children about the importance of sexual consent was from a very young age by asking for their consent before doing things like changing their nappies. Now, before I explain why I think this is a piece of flawed advice and why actually not only is it flawed, why I don't think you should be doing, but why it's actually going to possibly lead to greater problems in the lives of your children, let me explain my qualifications. I am someone who has been parenting for over 11 years now, and obviously continue to parent, and I am the parent of multiple children, so I understand how different personalities can work. I'd like to think that I understand a little bit, while I've still got lots to learn, that I understand a little bit about how this parenting gig works. And so straight away, when I heard this suggestion, I was like, yeah, I don't think you know what you're talking about. So first of all, for the first 12 to 24 months of a child's life, they don't even have self-awareness. Somewhere between 12 and 24 months is when you develop self-awareness. And the simple fact is that you can't consent to something without an understanding of self. You know, I consent, the word I, the self, is an essential factor in consent. You know, you actually have to be giving the consent. To give consent as yourself, you have to understand that you exist as an individual self. So it's kind of a bizarre thing to be suggesting that very young children could be giving consent anyway. It kind of makes me wonder what you think consent actually means, or whether you understand what children are and what they are not. Because children generally don't have the same understanding of issues. That understanding grows over time, and with nurturing love and care and input from their parents and the world around them and educators and all the other people that they encounter who help them to learn things, they begin to develop these rational abilities and understandings of the world as they grow into maturity as well, where things start to make a bit more sense. And as they grow, there are more and more things that perhaps they can give a consent to. But a very young child, they can't even begin to give consent. So consent is not simply a signal or saying the word yes. It's about having an understanding of something, about what you are consenting to, and the fact that you are the one doing the consenting. They can't do that from a very young age. Secondly, for any child who happened to be watching you, so a slightly older child watching you trying to get consent to change another child's nappy, here's the bizarre kind of thing that's going on there. Presumably, you wouldn't change their nappy if they didn't say yes, they didn't give consent. Because otherwise, what are you teaching the child with the nappy and the child who happens to be watching? You are teaching them a bizarre and very dangerous idea about consent. You would be teaching them that the actual response from the person doesn't matter, that consent is nothing more than a rudimentary going through the process of you asking a question and then doing what you're going to do or want to do anyway. Now, clearly, that's not what you want to be teaching kids when it comes to sexuality. So presumably what that means is that you are not going to change a child's nappy unless it says, yes, I consent to having my nappy changed. Now, not only is that a bizarre thing to do, but it's actually, I would say, a form of parental neglect, because there are often moments in the life of a child, particularly very young children, where you have to do things for them that they don't want to do themselves. Sometimes you have to do the thing which is the very opposite of what they want to do, and they will kick and scream and even throw a tantrum to try and get out of doing what they should be doing. But you need to do that. If you love your child and you genuinely care about their flourishing and well-being, then you have to do things that are acts of self-giving that are for their benefit. And that means sometimes you have to ignore their emotional states, right? So good parenting is actually about loving your child in moments where they don't want to even be loved, or they don't want to even do certain things. Now, here's the biggest problem of all, though, I think, about this idea of asking for consent before you change a nappy. Effectively, with very young children, what you have are these beautiful little creatures who also happen to be very urge-driven, very instinct-driven, and self-gratification is sort of one of the primary drivers at that very young stage of life that motivates a lot of their actions. But my son, who's 5.5, for example, he'll be sitting there and his bladder will be bursting, like his back teeth are floating. That's how desperately he needs to go to the toilet and relieve himself. But he will sit there, and if he's watching something on Netflix or he's playing with his Lego and he doesn't want to do that because he finds this thing here right now in front of him more gratifying, he won't do it. But the problem is, for his own good and for the good of the community, he actually has to be told, not consented, but told to go to the toilet, right? It's for his good. We don't want him to run his bladder to bursting point every time. We don't want a situation where he doesn't get to the toilet and then there's a disruption and everyone else has to clean up the mess that he makes. See, sometimes he has to learn a really important lesson, that his primary urge that he's got right now in front of him, this desire that he has, this overwhelming desire to gratify himself by playing with his Lego or watching the show on TV, isn't actually the most important thing in the world. That not every urge you have should be satisfied. And for a young child, when you add this idea of consent into the life of a very young child who tends to be very urge-driven, very instinct-driven, and a lot of it's about self-gratification, I would argue that what you're effectively in danger of teaching them is that the biggest urge, the strongest urge you happen to have right now, that's the one that everyone else should respect, including you, and you should follow that urge, no matter what. Well, obviously, that's the exact opposite of what you want to be teaching people if you're trying to teach them about the importance of sexual consent. What you're actually trying to teach them is that not every urge you have should be satisfied just because you want it to be satisfied. That your self-gratification is not the most important thing in the world. You need to be teaching them restraint, and you need to be teaching them boundaries, and you need to be teaching them not to be self-entitled. A lot of sexual assault is happening amongst that sort of youth and young adult community precisely because you have people who believe that they are entitled to have their desires gratified when they want them gratified and how they want them gratified, right? So teaching your child from a very young age that you don't do things unless they give consent when they have a very strong self-gratification mode going on in their life, you're not actually helping them. There's a real risk that you're actually going to grow an entitled child who is more likely to be less concerned about the boundaries when it comes to the wider community, other people, and how they should act with them. If you're a parent and you want to teach your kid well and you want to actually help them learn about consent in a good way, love the heck out of them, teach them to be a person of character, instill important virtues into their life. Virtues like authentic love for others, self-giving, putting yourself second, making self-sacrifices, self-control, right? These are really important things that are all part of that mix. And on the other side of it, don't forget to teach them about the virtue of prudence. So for example, maybe it's not a very prudent idea to go into a bar if you are all by yourself and drink yourself into oblivion. Because when you do that, you are putting yourself at risk of becoming the victim of a sexual predator. So maybe prudence is a good thing to be teaching them as well. Asking their permission before you change their nappy is not really going to do much, and it actually runs the risk of doing the exact opposite of what you want to teach them if you do that consistently and you start to teach them that their urges and their wants are the most important thing in your household. I'm opening the floor now though, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please let me know in the comments section below what you think. If you like the content I'm creating and you want to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. That's all it takes. I'm burning all sorts of daylight to keep the channel going, so your support is really, really appreciated. Don't forget, if you've got a question that you want to discuss on the Daily Question, a topic, a piece of movie news, something like that, send me an email or send me a tweet. All the details are in the video description below. I'm pretty sure I just heard the sound of theme music, so that means it's my time to depart. See you tomorrow on the Daily Question.